I was at a family gathering when my grandma asked, "Are you excited to turn 30? Are you excited to turn 30, sweetheart?" Grandma Rose's voice carried across the entire living room like a dinner bell, causing every conversation to screech to a halt. 23 head swiveled toward me in perfect unison, and I felt my face flush the same shade as her famous cranberry sauce. I'm 25, Grandma, I stammered, setting down my paper plate of turkey and stuffing. The words felt thick in my mouth, like I was speaking through peanut butter. "Oh honey, no need to be modest." She waved her wrinkled hand dismissively, her wedding ring catching the light from the artificial Christmas tree. "Diane told me all about your big 3-0 coming up in March. 30 is the new 20, you know." I shot a confused glance at my mom, who looked just as bewildered as I felt. March was indeed my birthday month, but I'd be turning 26, not 30. Aunt Diane sat across the room in her usual spot, the good armchair by the fireplace that she claimed the second she walked through the door at 2 p.m. sharp. She was picking at her manicured nails and wearing that smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Actually, Grandma Rose," my cousin Jake piped up from the kids' table, "even though he was 22, didn't you turn 30 like 5 years ago?" He was grinning like the Cheshire Cat, clearly delighted by this turn of events. "More like 10 years ago," shouted my other cousin, Emma, and suddenly half the family was cackling like hyenas. Someone made a crack about me needing reading glasses soon, and Uncle Bob started going on about his first midlife crisis at 32. "I'm 25, I repeated, louder this time, but Grandma Rose just patted my hand sympathetically. "Oh sweetheart, there's nothing wrong with getting older. Look at me, I'm 78 and still kicking." She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to what she probably thought was a whisper but could still be heard in the next county. "Diane mentioned you've been sensitive about the aging thing lately. But really, you look wonderful for 30. I wanted to crawl under the coffee table and hide among the dust bunnies and forgotten Cheerios." This was supposed to be a nice, normal Thanksgiving gathering, the kind where the biggest drama would be whether to watch football or the dog show, and where Uncle Pete would inevitably fall asleep in his chair by 4 p.m. with gravy on his shirt. Instead, I was being treated like I was having some sort of age-related breakdown while my actual age became the subject of family-wide debate. Aunt Diane finally stood up, smoothing down her pristine sweater. "Oh my, did I say 30? I meant 26, of course." She laughed, but it sounded forced, artificial. "You know how it is, Mom, all these birthdays blur together when you get to be our age." But the damage was done. For the rest of the evening, I got knowing looks and comments about being in denial and embracing the big 3-0. Every time someone mentioned my supposed upcoming milestone birthday, I felt smaller and smaller, like Alice drinking from the wrong bottle. It wasn't until I was driving home at 8:30 p.m., still picking turkey out of my teeth, that the pieces started clicking together in my mind. This wasn't the first time Grandma Rose had gotten family information spectacularly wrong at gatherings. And somehow, Aunt Diane always seemed to be the source. The more I thought about it during my drive home, the more examples came flooding back. Last Easter, Grandma had congratulated my brother Marcus on his promotion to senior manager at the accounting firm where he'd actually been demoted to part-time data entry 3 months earlier. He'd spent 20 awkward minutes trying to redirect the conversation while Aunt Diane nodded along knowingly from her perch by the dessert table. Then there was the 4th of July barbecue where Grandma asked my cousin Sarah when she was due, having heard she was finally pregnant with twins. Sarah, who'd been struggling with fertility issues for 2 years, had locked herself in the bathroom and cried for an hour. We'd all assumed Grandma had just misunderstood something, but now I was starting to see a pattern. I pulled into my apartment complex and sat in the car for a few minutes, engine ticking as it cooled. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "Sorry about tonight, honey. Grandma's been getting mixed up more lately. Don't take it personally." But that was just it, Grandma Rose wasn't getting mixed up. Her mind was sharp as ever. She could still beat any of us at Scrabble, remembered every birthday and anniversary to the day, and never forgot a doctor's appointment or medication time. The woman who could recite her entire grocery list from memory wasn't suddenly confused about basic family facts. Someone was feeding her wrong information on purpose. I climbed the stairs to my second-floor apartment, keys jingling as I fumbled with the lock. My cat, Fitzgerald, greeted me with his usual indignant meow about my extended absence. As I scratched behind his ears, more memories surfaced like bubbles in champagne. 2 Christmases ago, Grandma had asked my dad when he was planning to retire, having heard about his early pension package. Dad, who was actually struggling to make ends meet after the factory cut overtime hours, had to explain that retirement wasn't even on his radar for another 15 years. Aunt Diane had been the one to quickly change the subject, steering Grandma toward the cookie exchange. Last Thanksgiving, exactly 1 year ago, Grandma had praised my cousin Mike for getting into law school, when he'd actually dropped out of community college and was working at a tire shop. Mike had played along, probably too embarrassed to correct her, while Aunt Diane beamed proudly and talked about how all the kids were doing so well these days. I opened a can of food for Fitzgerald and watched him attack his dinner with single-minded determination. If only human problems were as simple as an empty food bowl. The worst part wasn't even the embarrassment, it was watching how these misunderstandings affected everyone. I'd seen the hurt in Sarah's eyes when she was asked about a pregnancy that didn't exist. I'd watched Marcus shrink into himself when praised for a promotion that was actually a humiliating demotion. These weren't harmless mistakes, they were precision strikes at everyone's most vulnerable spots. And somehow, mysteriously, Aunt Diane's information was always perfectly accurate. Grandma knew exactly when Diane got her real estate license renewed, celebrated her actual work anniversaries, and complimented her on achievements that were not only real but slightly embellished in Diane's favor. I settled onto my couch with a leftover piece of pumpkin pie and opened my laptop. If Diane was playing information warfare, maybe it was time to fight fire with fire. But first, I needed to figure out exactly how deep this rabbit hole went. I started making a list of every misunderstanding I could remember from family gatherings over the past 2 years. By 10:47 p.m., I had 14 separate incidents documented, and I was just getting started. I spent the next 3 days digging deeper, and what I found made my stomach turn. I called my cousin Sarah on Tuesday night, ostensibly to check in after the Thanksgiving disaster, but really to probe about other family gatherings. "Oh God, you mean there have been more incidents like the pregnancy thing?" Sarah's voice cracked through my phone speaker. I thought Grandma Rose was just, I don't know, getting her wires crossed. Think back to other gatherings. Has Grandma ever congratulated you on things that weren't true? There was a long pause, then a sharp intake of breath. Last Memorial Day. She asked me how I was enjoying my new job at the veterinary clinic. But Sarah, I got fired from that job in February. I was too embarrassed to tell anyone, so I just went along with it. I figured someone had seen my old LinkedIn profile or something. Who do you think told her about the job in the first place? I mean, it had to be Aunt Diane, right? She's the one who talks to Grandma Rose the most between gatherings. She calls her every Sunday at 3 p.m. like clockwork. Every Sunday at 3 p.m. I scribbled this down in the notebook I'd started keeping, right next to my growing list of victims. Because that's what we were, victims of a calculated campaign of emotional manipulation disguised as family updates. Wednesday evening, I called Marcus. He was even more forthcoming than Sarah, probably because he'd been carrying the shame of his demotion alone for months. The senior manager thing was brutal, he admitted. I'd just been moved to part-time, and suddenly I'm standing there while Grandma Rose tells everyone how proud she is of my big promotion. Uncle Bob started asking about my salary increase, and Aunt Rachel wanted to know if I could help her son get an internship at my high-level position. Did you ever tell Aunt Diane about the demotion? Are you kidding? I haven't told anyone about it. As far as the family knows, I'm still full-time with benefits. The only person who might have known was. He trailed off, and I could practically hear the gears turning. Oh, shit. Her daughter Emma works in HR at a company that shares our building. They grab coffee sometimes. Emma. Diane's perfect daughter who never seemed to be the target of any misinformation. I added this to my notes, drawing connecting lines like some conspiracy theorist with a corkboard and red string. By Thursday, I'd confirmed the pattern with 4 more family members. Each incident followed the same blueprint. Someone would experience a setback, disappointment, or private struggle. Somehow, through Diane's network of social connections, workplace gossip, or strategic eavesdropping, she'd learn about it. Then she'd flip the script when talking to Grandma Rose, turning failures into successes and private pain into public celebration. The cruelest part was how it isolated people in their shame. When Grandma congratulated you on something that was actually your biggest failure, you had 2 choices: correct her and expose your real situation to the entire family, or play along and feel like a fraud. Most people chose option 2, which meant they suffered in silence while appearing to be thriving. But Friday afternoon brought the revelation that made everything crystal clear. I was grabbing coffee at Starbucks when I spotted Diane's car in the parking lot of Grandma Rose's assisted living community. It was 2:47 p.m., 13 minutes before her supposed regular Sunday call time, except it was Friday. I sat in my car and watched through the lobby's floor-to-ceiling windows as Diane gestured animatedly to Grandma Rose, a manila folder open on the coffee table between them. Grandma was taking notes in her careful handwriting, nodding along like a student receiving a lesson. That folder, I realized with growing horror, was probably full of our lives, distorted, weaponized versions of our struggles, ready to be deployed like emotional landmines at the next family gathering. I gripped my steering wheel until my knuckles went white. This wasn't just cruel gossip or innocent mistakes. This was warfare. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Diane's satisfied smile as she handed Grandma Rose that manila folder full of our twisted truths. At 2:17 a.m., I gave up on sleep entirely and padded to my kitchen to make tea. Fitzgerald followed, probably hoping for an early breakfast, and settled beside me as I sat at my small dining table with my laptop. If Diane was keeping files on all of us, I needed to know exactly what ammunition she had. I started with social media, scrolling through months of family posts, comments, and tagged photos. What I found was chilling in its methodical nature. Every single piece of misinformation could be traced back to something real that had been deliberately inverted. Marcus posting about new opportunities after his demotion became a promotion in Diane's version. Sarah's cryptic post about life changes during her fertility struggles became a pregnancy announcement. My own Instagram story about quarter-life reflections at 25 had somehow morphed into anxiety about turning 30. But the most disturbing discovery came at 3:42 a.m. when I found a comment thread from 8 months ago that I'd completely forgotten about. My mom had posted a photo of Dad at his workbench, captioned, "My handy guy fixing everything as always." Diane had commented, "So inspiring how he keeps working so hard instead of slowing down. True dedication." At the time, it seemed like a nice compliment. Now I could see it for what it was, a probe. She was fishing for information about Dad's work situation, and when she didn't get the response she wanted, she'd invented her own narrative about his early retirement plans. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through our family group chat history. There it was, pattern after pattern of Diane asking seemingly innocent questions: how's everyone doing with their big life changes, and so excited to hear about everyone's good news lately, and can't wait to catch up on all the exciting updates. When people responded with vague pleasantries or didn't respond at all, she'd apparently filled in the blanks herself. Radio silence about job troubles became job promotions. Absence from family events due to financial stress became exotic vacations. Privacy about relationship issues became secret engagements. By 4:15 a.m., I had documented 23 separate incidents over the past 18 months. The scope was breathtaking, and I was probably only seeing the tip of the iceberg. I made another cup of tea and opened a fresh document on my laptop. If Diane wanted to play information games, I'd give her more information than she knew what to do with. But first, I needed to test my theory about how she was feeding this data to Grandma Rose. I crafted a carefully worded text to the family group chat: "Hey everyone. Had some exciting news this week but don't want to jinx it by sharing details yet. We'll fill you all in soon. Crossed fingers sparkles." The response was immediate, even at 4:23 a.m. "Diane, ooh, can't wait to hear. Is it work-related? Personal? I'm so bad with suspense." Smiling face with smiling eyes. Perfect. I left her hanging with a simple, "You'll see." Winking face and waited. The real test would come Sunday afternoon. If my theory was correct, Diane would invent some elaborate story about my mystery news during her 3 p.m. call with Grandma Rose. Then I'd know for certain that she wasn't just sharing information, she was creating it. But as I finally crawled back into bed at 5:47 a.m., one more realization hit me like a punch to the gut. If Diane was willing to manipulate an elderly woman and emotionally torture her own family members for sport, what would she do when she realized someone was onto her? I was about to find out just how dangerous cornering a sociopath could be. Sunday arrived with the weight of inevitability. I spent the morning pacing my apartment, checking my phone every few minutes like I was waiting for test results. At 2:45 p.m., I parked across from Grandma Rose's building and watched through binoculars I borrowed from my neighbor Jim, who thought I was bird watching. Diane's silver Honda pulled up at exactly 2:58 p.m. She hurried inside carrying 2 manila folders this time, one noticeably thicker than the other. My stomach clenched as I watched her settle into the same chair by the lobby window, spreading papers across the coffee table like she was preparing for a board meeting. Through the binoculars, I could see Grandma Rose's animated reactions as Diane pointed to different documents. At one point, Grandma clapped her hands together in delight, and my heart sank. Whatever story Diane was spinning about my mysterious good news, it was clearly elaborate. The meeting lasted 47 minutes. When Diane finally packed up her folders, she was wearing that satisfied smile I'd grown to despise. She even hugged Grandma Rose goodbye with what looked like genuine affection, which somehow made it worse. I didn't have to wait long for confirmation. At 6:23 p.m., Mom called. "Honey, I just got off the phone with Grandma Rose, and she's absolutely thrilled about your promotion." Mom's voice bubbled with excitement. "Director of Marketing at 25. I had no idea you were even being considered. Why didn't you tell us you were interviewing?" My blood turned to ice water. What exactly did she say? That you're getting a $30,000 raise in your own office with a window. She's so proud she's already called Aunt Margaret and Uncle Pete to brag about her granddaughter, the marketing director. I closed my eyes and pressed my palm against my forehead. Of course Diane would invent something that made me look successful but also set me up for massive embarrassment when the truth came out. A promotion that big would be impossible to fake at family gatherings. "Mom, I need to tell you something." "Oh. And she mentioned you might be moving to that new apartment complex downtown. The expensive one with the pool. Diane said you were looking at places to celebrate your success." The expensive apartment complex. I had driven through there exactly once, 3 months ago, taking a shortcut to Target. But somehow that 20-second detour had morphed into apartment hunting in Diane's twisted telephone game. "Mom, listen carefully. None of that is true." There was a long pause. "What do you mean?" "I didn't get a promotion. I'm not moving." I sent a vague text about good news on Friday morning just to see what would happen, and somehow it turned into this elaborate fantasy. But why would Grandma Rose make that up? She didn't. Aunt Diane did. I spent the next 37 minutes explaining everything, the pattern I discovered, the documentation I compiled, the systematic way Diane had been feeding Grandma Rose false information for months. Mom's responses grew shorter and sharper as the pieces fell into place. "The pregnancy thing with Sarah," Mom said finally, her voice tight with anger. "And Marcus's fake promotion. Jesus Christ, I thought poor Grandma was developing dementia. She's sharp as ever. She's just working with poisoned intel. This is sick. This is really, genuinely sick." Mom was quiet for a moment. "What are you going to do?" I looked at Fitzgerald, who was sitting in his favorite spot by the window, completely unbothered by human drama. "I'm going to give Diane exactly what she wants. More family news than she can handle." "What does that mean?" "It means Christmas is going to be very interesting this year." After hanging up with Mom, I opened my laptop and created a new document. If Diane wanted to play information warfare, I'd arm her with enough ammunition to blow up in her own face. The plan was beautiful in its simplicity, and it would destroy her credibility forever. The plan crystallized over the next week like sugar hardening into candy. I would create the most elaborate, ridiculous family newsletter in history and make sure it found its way to Aunt Diane. Then I'd sit back and watch her use it to feed Grandma Rose a buffet of absurd lies that would expose her manipulation once and for all. But first, I needed allies. Tuesday evening, I called a family war council at my apartment. Mom arrived at 7 p.m. sharp with a bottle of wine and murder in her eyes. Marcus showed up 20 minutes later with a pizza and the kind of grim determination usually reserved for tax audits. Sarah drove in from across town carrying a legal pad and 3 different colored pens, ready to take this as seriously as a court case. "Okay," I said, spreading my documentation across the coffee table like a detective laying out evidence. "Here's what we know for certain." I walked them through the timeline, 23 confirmed incidents of misinformation, all traceable back to Diane's Sunday calls with Grandma Rose. Mom kept shaking her head and muttering, "I can't believe this," while Marcus got progressively angrier with each revelation. "She knew about my demotion through Emma," he said, crushing his pizza crust with unnecessary force. "They had coffee the week before Easter, and Emma mentioned seeing me in the HR office. I thought it was just casual conversation." Sarah looked up from her note-taking. "If she's been doing this for 18 months that we can prove, how long has it actually been going on?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire we were just beginning to understand the size of. I thought about family gatherings from years past, awkward moments that never quite made sense, congratulations that felt off target, Grandma Rose's occasional confusion about things we were certain we'd never told her. "Remember Jake's graduation party 3 years ago?" Mom said slowly, wine making her more reflective than angry now. Grandma kept asking him about his full scholarship to state. But Jake paid his own way with student loans. "And she congratulated me on getting engaged to David at that same party," Sarah added, her pen hovering over the legal pad. "But David and I had broken up 2 months earlier." I was too embarrassed to correct her in front of everyone. The scope was staggering. This wasn't recent behavior, it was a pattern of manipulation that stretched back years, maybe even decades. Diane had been systematically destabilizing family relationships, creating embarrassment and isolation, all while positioning herself as the most reliable source of family information. "So what's the plan?" Marcus asked, leaning forward with the intensity of someone ready for battle. I pulled out the fake newsletter I'd been drafting. "We're going to give her exactly what she wants, family news. But we're going to make it so ridiculously over the top that when she repeats it to Grandma Rose, everyone will finally see what's been happening. The newsletter was a masterpiece of calculated absurdity. According to my fictional family update, Marcus had been headhunted by Google for a senior engineering position with a $200,000 starting salary and stock options. Sarah was opening her own veterinary practice and had been featured in National Geographic for her groundbreaking work with endangered species. Mom and Dad were taking early retirement to their newly purchased vineyard in Tuscany. But the crown jewel was my own fake achievement. I'd apparently been accepted to Harvard Business School on a full academic scholarship while simultaneously landing a modeling contract with a major agency in New York. This is insane, Sarah laughed, reading over the draft. A modeling contract? You're 5 feet 4 inches. That's the point. It's so obviously fake that anyone with half a brain would question it. I highlighted another section. But look, Diane's information stays completely realistic. According to this newsletter, she renewed her real estate license and won a customer service award. Mom studied the document with professional appreciation. You're making everyone else's news unbelievable while keeping hers mundane. When Grandma starts congratulating people on their impossible achievements, Diane will have to either admit she made it all up or double down on lies so ridiculous that even she can't defend them. I saved the document and opened my email. The beauty is, she won't be able to resist. She's addicted to having insider information. Marcus grinned for the first time all evening. When do we deploy this masterpiece? Tomorrow. I'll email it to the family group list, but I'll send Diane's copy separately with a note saying I wanted her to see it first since she talks to Grandma Rose the most. I attached the file and hovered my finger over the send button. By Sunday's phone call, she'll have had 6 days to memorize every fake detail. And then? Sarah asked. Then we wait for Christmas dinner and watch her world explode. I hit send at 9:47 p.m., and my phone buzzed with Diane's response at 9:51 p.m. How exciting. Can't wait to share all this wonderful news with Grandma Rose. She'll be so proud. Smiling face with smiling eyes. The trap was set. The waiting was torture. Every day between sending the newsletter and Diane's Sunday call felt like sitting in a dentist's office, knowing pain was coming but not exactly when. I found myself checking my phone obsessively, half expecting her to text with questions about my supposed Harvard acceptance or modeling contract. But Diane stayed silent, which was somehow worse than if she'd interrogated me. It meant she was planning, strategizing, maybe even embellishing my already ridiculous fake achievements into something even more absurd. Friday afternoon brought an unexpected complication. I was grabbing lunch at Panera when my phone rang, Grandma Rose's number flashing on the screen. My heart stopped. She never called between family gatherings unless something was seriously wrong. Hi, Grandma, I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. Oh, sweetheart. I just had to call and tell you how proud I am. Her voice sparkled with joy, and my stomach dropped. Diane stopped by yesterday for our usual chat, and she told me the most wonderful news about your modeling contract. Yesterday. Thursday. 3 days before her regular Sunday call. She told you already. I managed. A contract with Versace. Can you imagine? My granddaughter, a fashion model in New York City. I've been calling all my friends at the community center. Martha Chen's granddaughter is a dental hygienist, but a Versace model. I'm beside myself. Versace. I'd written major modeling agency in the newsletter. Diane had upgraded me to Versace, apparently deciding my fake achievement wasn't spectacular enough. Grandma, and Harvard Business School. Diane said you got a full ride, plus they're paying you a living stipend of $5,000 a month because your grades were so exceptional. A living stipend. That detail definitely wasn't in my newsletter. Diane wasn't just repeating my lies, she was improving them, adding flourishes that made them even more unbelievable. She also mentioned your apartment hunting on the Upper East Side, Grandma continued breathlessly. A penthouse with views of Central Park. Oh honey, I can't wait to visit you in your fancy new life. My mouth went dry. This was spiraling beyond anything I'd anticipated. I'd planned for Diane to repeat my fake newsletter at Christmas dinner, where I could immediately debunk it in front of the whole family. But she'd jumped the gun, and now Grandma Rose was calling her friends, building up expectations that would make the eventual truth even more devastating. Grandma, listen, there's something I need to. Oh. I almost forgot the best part. Diane said the modeling agency wants to feature you in their Times Square billboard campaign. Times Square. Can you imagine my granddaughter's face 40 feet tall in the middle of New York? Times Square billboard. I gripped the phone tighter, watching other Panera customers enjoy their normal lunches, oblivious to my world imploding. Diane had taken my trap and turned it into a nuclear weapon aimed directly at Grandma Rose's heart. I have to run, sweetheart. Bridge club starts in 10 minutes and I simply must tell Eleanor about your billboard. She's been bragging about her grandson's promotion to assistant manager at Best Buy, but a Times Square model. I love you so much, and I'm so proud of who you've become. The line went dead, leaving me staring at my untouched sandwich. Around me, the lunch crowd chattered normally, but I felt like I was trapped in a soundproof bubble, watching life happen through thick glass. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Heard about your big news. So exciting. Can't wait to celebrate at Christmas. Smiling face with smiling eyes, Cousin Emily. Then another, Versace. Holy shit. Jake. And another, Mom says you're moving to Manhattan. Call me. Sarah. Word was spreading like wildfire through the family network. Diane hadn't just told Grandma Rose, she'd apparently called everyone. My trap had become a disaster, and Christmas dinner was still 3 weeks away. My phone didn't stop buzzing for the next 4 hours. Every family member, distant cousin, and family friend seemed to have heard about my miraculous transformation from marketing assistant to Harvard-bound Versace model. The texts ranged from genuine excitement to barely concealed skepticism, but they all had one thing in common: they were coming from people I'd never told about any good news. At 3:47 p.m., Uncle Bob called. Kiddo. Heard you're gonna be the next Giselle. Your old Uncle Bob's pretty proud right about now. Uncle Bob, how did you? Diane called your Aunt Rachel this morning, all excited about your big break. Said you didn't want to make a big announcement yet, but she couldn't help sharing with close family. His voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. Between you and me, I always thought you had that model look. Those cheekbones run in the family, you know. I didn't have prominent cheekbones. I looked like what I was, a perfectly average 25-year-old with student loans and a studio apartment that smelled faintly of cat litter. After Uncle Bob hung up, I called Marcus in full panic mode. She's not waiting for Christmas. She's calling everyone now. What do you mean everyone? Uncle Bob just called to congratulate me on becoming the next Giselle. Diane told Aunt Rachel, who probably told Uncle Pete, who definitely told his golf buddies by now. This thing is spreading faster than a TikTok dance. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. So what do we do? I have no idea. I slumped onto my couch, where Fitzgerald was napping in a patch of afternoon sunlight, blissfully unaware that his human was experiencing a complete life meltdown. I created this fake newsletter to expose her at Christmas dinner, not to become the star of some elaborate fantasy that's reaching the entire extended family. Can't you just tell people it's not true? Tell them what? That I made up a fake family newsletter as part of an elaborate sting operation to catch my aunt in a lie. That I've been documenting her manipulation tactics for weeks like some kind of family private investigator. I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache building. I sound crazy just saying it out loud. At 4:23 p.m., things got worse. My phone rang with a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was local. Hello, is this the future Harvard student I've been hearing about? I'm sorry, who is this? This is Margaret Walsh from Channel 7 News. I'm Diane Patterson's neighbor, and she mentioned your incredible story at our book club today. We're always looking for inspiring local interest pieces, and a young woman getting into Harvard while landing a major modeling contract. Well, that's exactly the kind of feel-good story our viewers love. My blood turned to actual ice. I'm sorry, what? We'd love to do a feature segment on your journey. Nothing too invasive, maybe a quick interview, some shots of you at your current job, perhaps a phone call with your Harvard admissions counselor. We could film early next week and air it Friday before Christmas. What do you say? Channel 7 News wanted to interview me about my fictional acceptance to Harvard and my imaginary Versace contract. On television. Where thousands of people would see it and where the lies would be preserved forever in digital archives. I'm going to have to call you back, I managed. Of course. Here's my direct number. And congratulations, dear. Your aunt is just glowing with pride. She showed us photos on her phone. You're going to be a natural in front of the camera. Photos. Diane was showing people photos of me at book club, weaving my face into her elaborate fiction like she was casting a movie. I hung up and immediately called Mom. She answered on the first ring. Did Channel 7 News just call you? She asked without preamble. You too. Margaret Walsh called me 20 minutes ago asking for background information about your inspiring journey. I told her there must be some mistake, and she said Diane Patterson had given her my number as your proud mother. Mom's voice was tight with barely controlled rage. She wanted to know if I'd saved your Harvard acceptance letter for the camera crew. This had officially spiraled completely out of control. What started as a plan to expose Diane at a family dinner had somehow mutated into a local news story that would humiliate not just me, but my entire family when the truth came out. Mom, I said, my voice very small, I think I may have created a monster. The Channel 7 situation had me spiraling, but it was nothing compared to the phone call I received at 6:47 p.m. that Friday evening. I was stress-eating leftover Chinese takeout and frantically Googling how to stop false news stories when my phone rang with a number I recognized but desperately didn't want to see, Diane herself. Sweetheart. Her voice was saccharine sweet, like artificial vanilla. I just had to call and tell you how thrilled I am about all your wonderful news. My chopsticks froze halfway to my mouth. Hi, Aunt Diane. You know, I've been thinking, it's such a shame that you wanted to keep everything quiet until after the holidays. But honey, good news like this just has a way of spreading. I hope you don't mind that I shared with a few close family members. I was just so proud, I couldn't help myself. A few close family members. I'd counted 17 phone calls and 23 texts since lunch. Actually, Aunt Diane, there's something I need to tell you about that newsletter. Oh. Before I forget, she interrupted smoothly, Margaret Walsh from Channel 7 called me this afternoon. Such a lovely woman. She's very interested in featuring your story. I told her you're quite modest about your achievements, but this is exactly the kind of inspiration our community needs to see. The way she said inspiration made my skin crawl. There was something predatory in her tone, like a cat that had cornered a particularly interesting mouse. I gave her your number, of course, and your mother's for background. I hope that's okay. I also mentioned that your modeling portfolio might make for good visuals, though I told her you're probably too humble to share those photos yourself. My modeling portfolio. The portfolio that didn't exist for the modeling contract that was completely fictional. Diane, listen. You know what's funny? Her voice took on a different quality, sharper around the edges. I was just reviewing that lovely newsletter you sent, and I noticed something interesting. Some of the details seemed a little, shall we say, ambitious. Harvard Business School is extremely competitive, and I couldn't help but wonder about the timeline. My heart stopped beating entirely. She knew. She knew it was fake, and she'd spread the lies anyway. But then I thought, why would my sweet niece send out false information to her own family? That would be such a cruel thing to do, getting everyone's hopes up, making poor Grandma Rose call all her friends with exciting news that wasn't true. Her laugh was like broken glass. That would be the kind of thing someone truly malicious would do, don't you think? The threat was crystal clear. She was holding me hostage with my own fake newsletter. If I tried to expose her pattern of manipulation, she'd frame me as the manipulator, the granddaughter who deliberately lied to her elderly grandmother for attention. So I'm sure everything in that newsletter is completely accurate, she continued, her voice returning to its false sweetness. And I'm sure you'll be happy to clarify any details with Margaret Walsh when she calls back tomorrow morning. She's planning to start filming Monday, by the way. Monday. 4 days away. For days to either produce evidence of my Harvard acceptance and Versace contract, or have my lies exposed on local television while being painted as someone cruel enough to deceive her own grandmother. I should probably mention, Diane added casually, I showed Margaret some photos from your Instagram. That shot of you in the black dress from Sarah's birthday party last year. She thinks it shows real model potential. Very photogenic. She'd been studying my social media, curating evidence for her fictional narrative. This wasn't just manipulation, it was performance art. Anyway, I should let you go. You must have so much to prepare for your big interview. Oh, and honey. Her voice dropped to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than shouting. Grandma Rose is so excited about visiting you in Manhattan. She's already started saving up for the train ticket. It would just break her heart if something went wrong with your plans. The line went dead, leaving me alone with the devastating realization that I wasn't the hunter in this scenario. I was the prey. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Diane's satisfied smile morphing into Margaret Walsh's eager reporter face, then dissolving into Grandma Rose's inevitable heartbreak when she realized her granddaughter was either a liar or a fraud. At 3:17 a.m., I gave up on sleep entirely and made coffee with shaking hands. Fitzgerald watched me pace the kitchen with the patient concern of a therapist who'd seen this behavior before. What am I going to do? I asked him. He responded by knocking his water bowl off its stand, which somehow felt like the most honest communication I'd had in days. By sunrise Saturday, I had 3 options, all terrible. 1. Come clean to Margaret Walsh, admit the newsletter was fake, and watch Diane spin it into proof that I was a manipulative liar who cruelly deceived my elderly grandmother. 2. Somehow fake my way through a television interview about Harvard Business School and Versace modeling contracts, then deal with the exponentially larger disaster when the truth inevitably came out. 3. Disappear entirely. Change my name, move to Alaska, become someone who raises sled dogs and never speaks to another human being. Option 3 was looking increasingly attractive when my phone rang at 7:23 a.m. Sarah's name flashed on the screen. Are you awake? She whispered. Unfortunately, yes. I've been up all night thinking about your Diane situation, and I figured something out. Her voice carried the manic energy of someone who'd been drinking too much coffee and connecting too many dots. She's not just manipulating information, she's collecting it. This is like emotional insider trading. I slumped against my kitchen counter. What do you mean? Think about it. She gathers intelligence about everyone's failures and vulnerabilities, then uses that information to make herself look better by comparison. When she tells Grandma Rose that Marcus got demoted but frames it as a promotion, she gets to be the successful one with a struggling brother. Okay, but how does that help me with? She made a mistake with your fake newsletter, Sarah interrupted excitedly. She got greedy. Instead of just repeating your lies to Grandma Rose privately like usual, she spread them everywhere because they were too good to keep to herself. A Harvard acceptance and a Versace contract. That's like hitting the manipulation lottery. I started to see where she was going. So she exposed her own pattern. Exactly. But more than that, she exposed her sources. Uncle Bob mentioned Diane called Aunt Rachel directly. That's not normal family communication flow. Why would Diane be calling people she only talks to at Christmas unless she had an agenda? Sarah was right. In her excitement to weaponize my fictional achievements, Diane had deviated from her usual subtle Sunday calls with Grandma Rose. She'd gone into full broadcast mode, contacting family members she rarely spoke to, all within hours of receiving my fake newsletter. I've been making a list, Sarah continued, and in the past 24 hours, Diane has called or texted at least 12 family members who she normally only contacts through the family group chat. How could you possibly know that? Because I called them. All of them. At 6 a.m. Sarah's voice took on a slightly unhinged quality that made me worried about her mental state. I told them I was trying to coordinate a surprise congratulations gift for you, and I needed to know exactly when and how they heard about your news. My coffee mug slipped from my hand, shattering against the kitchen floor. Sarah, what did you find out? Diane called Aunt Rachel at 9:15 a.m. yesterday. Uncle Bob at 9:47 a.m. Cousin Emma at 10:23 a.m. She worked through a contact list like she was running a phone tree for a natural disaster. Sarah's voice was getting faster, more excited. And here's the kicker, she told 3 different versions of your story. What? Uncle Bob thinks you're modeling for Versace. Aunt Rachel heard Gucci. Emma was told it was Calvin Klein. She was embellishing in real time, making each version more dramatic than the last. I stared at the broken coffee mug pieces scattered across my kitchen floor, each shard reflecting the morning light like tiny fragments of my shattered plan. But Sarah's discovery meant something crucial. Diane hadn't just taken my bait, she'd choked on it. Sarah, I said slowly, I think you just handed me the evidence I need to destroy her. The revelation that Diane had told 3 different versions of my fake story was like finding a crack in a dam. I spent Saturday morning calling every family member Sarah had contacted, pretending I was just checking in while actually documenting the wildly different tales Diane had spun. Cousin Jake heard I was moving to Los Angeles to model for Hollywood movie posters. Aunt Margaret was told I'd been accepted to Harvard Law School, not business school, with a specialty in international fashion law. Uncle Pete believed I was opening my own modeling agency in Manhattan while completing my MBA online. By noon, I had documented 7 completely different versions of my fictional achievements, each one more elaborate than my original fake newsletter. Diane hadn't just embellished, she'd created an entire multiverse of lies, apparently forgetting which story she told to whom. But the real breakthrough came when I called Great Aunt Dolores, who lived 3 hours north and rarely attended family gatherings. She was Grandma Rose's older sister and had the family memory of an elephant. Oh honey, that Diane has been telling your grandmother stories for years, Dolores said, her 92-year-old voice sharp with disapproval. Last Christmas, she told Rose that your cousin Timothy was getting married to some senator's daughter. Timothy's been single for 5 years and works at a gas station. How long has this been going on? I'd say at least 10 years, maybe more. Rose would call me so excited about everyone's big achievements, and half the time I'd think, that doesn't sound right. But I figured maybe I was just out of touch. Dolores paused, and I heard her sipping something. Last summer, Rose called crying because she'd sent Timothy a congratulations card about his fancy wedding, and he called her confused and hurt, asking why she thought he was getting married. My hands started shaking. What did Grandma Rose think happened? She thought she was losing her mind. Diane convinced her that she'd mixed up family news, maybe heard something wrong or remembered incorrectly. Poor Rose has been writing everything down in a notebook ever since, trying to keep track of what's real and what's not. The cruelty of it hit me like a physical blow. Diane wasn't just manipulating family dynamics, she was gaslighting an elderly woman into questioning her own mental stability. Grandma Rose had been carrying around a notebook, desperately trying to fact-check her own memory because she trusted Diane's information more than her own instincts. Dolores, this is important. Do you think Grandma Rose would believe me if I told her what's really been happening? Honey, Rose has been waiting for someone to tell her she's not crazy for months. That woman's mind is sharp as a tack, always has been. But Diane's got her so turned around, she doesn't trust her own judgment anymore. I hung up and immediately drove to Grandma Rose's assisted living community. It was 2:47 p.m. on Saturday, and I knew Diane wouldn't be there for her usual manipulation session until Sunday afternoon. This was my window. I found Grandma Rose in the community garden, tending to a small plot of herbs in her weekend clothes, the soft pink sweater I'd given her last Christmas and her good pearl earrings that she wore when she wanted to feel elegant. Sweetheart. She looked genuinely surprised to see me. What a wonderful surprise. I was just telling my Basil about your modeling contract. She was talking to her plants about my fake achievements. My heart broke into approximately 17 pieces. Grandma, we need to talk about Diane. I sat down on the wooden bench beside her herb garden, watching her weathered hands gently adjust a stake supporting her tomato plant. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the courtyard, and I could hear the distant sound of other residents playing cards in the community room. Grandma, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. I took a deep breath. Have you been writing things down in a notebook because you're worried about forgetting family news? Her hands stilled on the tomato vine. For a long moment, she didn't look at me, just stared at her plants with the kind of focused attention that meant she was thinking hard about something important. How did you know about my notebook? She asked quietly. Great Aunt Dolores told me. She's worried about you. Grandma Rose finally turned to face me, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before, vulnerability mixed with relief, like someone who'd been carrying a heavy secret and was finally ready to put it down. I have been writing things down, she admitted. Ever since that business with Timothy's wedding that never happened. I called him so excited, sent him a card, and he was so confused. He asked me where I'd gotten the idea he was engaged, and I couldn't remember exactly. I just knew someone had told me. What did Diane say when you asked her about it? Grandma Rose's expression shifted, becoming carefully neutral. She said I must have misunderstood something, or maybe overheard a phone conversation and gotten confused about which cousin was getting married. She was so patient about it, so understanding. She said it happens to everyone as they get older. The manipulation was even more insidious than I'd realized. Diane hadn't just been feeding false information, she'd been systematically undermining Grandma Rose's confidence in her own memory every time the lies fell apart. Grandma, I need to tell you something that's going to sound crazy at first, but I need you to trust me. I pulled out my phone and opened the Notes app where I'd been documenting everything. Diane has been lying to you about family news for years. On purpose. Her eyebrows drew together. What do you mean? The modeling contract she told you about. The Harvard acceptance. None of it is true. I made it all up as part of a test to see what she would do with fake information. I scrolled through my documented timeline. And she didn't just repeat my lies, she made them bigger, more elaborate, and told different versions to different people. Grandma Rose was quiet for several long minutes, staring at my phone screen as I showed her the evidence Sarah and I had compiled. The different stories about Versace versus Gucci versus Calvin Klein. The timeline of phone calls that happened within hours of Diane receiving my fake newsletter. The pattern of misinformation stretching back years. But why would she do such a thing? Grandma Rose asked finally, her voice very small. I think she likes controlling the family narrative. When she makes everyone else look either more successful than they actually are, or highlights their failures, she gets to be the stable, reliable one in the middle. The one you depend on for information. She calls me every Sunday at 3 o'clock, Grandma Rose said slowly. I started looking forward to those calls because she always had such interesting updates about everyone. I felt so connected to the family through her stories. That's exactly what she wanted. She made herself indispensable to you while isolating everyone else. I reached over and took her hand. Grandma, you're not losing your memory. You're not confused or forgetful. Someone you trusted was deliberately feeding you false information, then making you doubt yourself when reality didn't match her stories. Grandma Rose squeezed my hand tight, and I saw tears gathering in her eyes, not sad tears, but angry ones. That manipulative little snake, she said with surprising venom. Tomorrow is Sunday. She'll be here at 3 o'clock sharp with her folder full of lies, expecting me to write down every word like a good little old lady who can't think for herself. She looked at me with a gleam in her eye that reminded me exactly where I'd inherited my scheming tendencies. What do you say we give her a Sunday call she'll never forget? Sunday arrived with the electric anticipation of a thunderstorm. Grandma Rose and I had spent Saturday evening planning our counterstrike with the tactical precision of generals preparing for battle. She'd invited me to visit during Diane's call, perfectly innocent on the surface, but we both knew I'd be there as her backup witness. At 2:45 p.m., I parked in the visitor lot and made my way to Grandma Rose's apartment. She answered the door wearing her sharpest outfit, the navy blue dress she saved for church and important occasions, paired with her good jewelry and a smile that could cut glass. Ready for the performance of a lifetime, she asked, gesturing me toward the sitting area where she'd strategically placed 2 chairs facing the couch where Diane always sat. Are you sure you want to do this? We could still just confront her privately. Absolutely not. Grandma Rose's voice carried steel I'd rarely heard before. That woman has been making me question my own mind for months. She's going to face the consequences in exactly the same public way she created the problem. At exactly 2:58 p.m., we heard Diane's familiar knock, 3 quick raps followed by her sing-song, "It's me." Grandma Rose took a deep breath, smoothed her dress, and opened the door. Diane. Right on time as always. Look who's here, my granddaughter stopped by for a visit. Diane's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second when she saw me, but she recovered quickly. How wonderful. I was just telling my book club yesterday about your exciting news. She settled into her usual spot on the couch and placed not one but two manila folders on the coffee table. I brought extra updates today, so much happening in the family. Before we get to family news, Grandma Rose said pleasantly, I wanted to ask you something. Yesterday, I called Margaret Chen to tell her about my granddaughter's modeling contract, and she mentioned something odd. Diane's hands stilled on her folders. Oh. She said her grandson Jake heard it was a Calvin Klein contract, not Versace. Isn't that funny? I was sure you said Versace. Grandma Rose tilted her head with innocent confusion. Did I write it down wrong in my notebook? Well, you know how information gets mixed up in a big family, Diane said carefully. Maybe Jake misheard something. That's what I thought. So I called a few more people to double-check. Grandma Rose pulled out a small notepad, not her usual information notebook, but a new one we prepared specifically for this moment. Uncle Bob was certain it was Versace, but Aunt Rachel distinctly remembered you saying Gucci. And Emma could have sworn you told her Calvin Klein. The color was slowly draining from Diane's face. I'm sure I said the same thing to everyone. People just hear what they want to hear sometimes. You know what's really strange though? I interjected, speaking for the first time since Diane arrived. I never told anyone I had a modeling contract at all. With any company. Diane's laugh sounded like breaking glass. Don't be modest, sweetheart. You sent that lovely newsletter to everyone. I did send a newsletter, I agreed. But I never mentioned which company offered me a modeling contract. I just said, major modeling agency. So I'm really curious how you knew specific brand names to tell people. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. Diane's eyes darted between Grandma Rose and me, and I could practically see her calculating whether to double down on the lies or try a different approach. I must have misremembered, she said finally. You know how excited I get about family achievements. Sometimes I fill in details that weren't there. Yes, Grandma Rose said with deadly sweetness, you do tend to fill in a lot of details that weren't there. In fact, I've been keeping track. She opened her notepad to reveal 3 pages of meticulously documented lies, complete with dates, times, and the names of people who could verify each contradiction. Diane's face went completely white. Now then, Grandma Rose continued, shall we discuss Timothy's imaginary wedding? The moment Grandma Rose mentioned Timothy's wedding, Diane's carefully constructed facade crumbled like a house of cards in a hurricane. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly, and for the first time in my life, I saw genuine panic in her eyes. Timothy's wedding was a misunderstanding, she said weakly, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought I heard something at Rachel's barbecue. Diane. Grandma Rose's voice cut through the excuse like a scalpel. Timothy called me 3 days ago. We had a very long conversation about family dynamics and manipulation. He told me some fascinating things about conversations you've had with various family members over the years. My heart hammered against my ribs. Grandma Rose hadn't mentioned calling Timothy during our planning session yesterday. This was a new development, and from the look of absolute terror spreading across Diane's face, it was a devastating one. He remembered the gas station incident from last summer, Grandma Rose continued, consulting her notepad with the precision of a prosecutor reading charges. You told him I was disappointed in his career choices. You said I'd been asking why he couldn't be more like successful Marcus with his big promotion. That's not, Diane started. Except Marcus never got a promotion. He got demoted. Which you knew. Grandma Rose flipped a page in her notebook. Timothy spent 4 months thinking his grandmother was ashamed of him because you convinced him I was comparing him unfavorably to his cousin's fake success. I watched Diane's hands tremble as she reached for her manila folders, like they contained some sort of salvation. But Grandma Rose wasn't finished. Then there's Sarah's pregnancy announcement that never happened. The one that sent her crying in the bathroom for an hour last 4th of July because she's been struggling with infertility. Grandma Rose's voice grew harder with each word. You knew about her fertility struggles because Emma mentioned seeing her at the reproductive health clinic downtown. So you decided to twist that knife a little deeper, didn't you? Mom, I never meant to hurt anyone, Diane said, and I realized with a shock that she'd shifted to calling Grandma Rose Mom instead of her usual distant pleasantries. I was just trying to keep family spirits up, share good news. By making up good news that didn't exist. I interjected. By systematically lying to an elderly woman and then gaslighting her into thinking she was losing her memory when your stories didn't add up. Diane whirled toward me, and for a split second, I saw something ugly and desperate in her expression. You don't understand the pressure of being the only one who stays in touch. The only one who calls regularly, who cares enough to keep Mom informed about everyone's lives. You weren't keeping her informed, Grandma Rose said quietly. You were isolating her. Making her depend on your version of reality while cutting her off from actual relationships with her family members. The truth of it hung in the air like smoke. Diane had positioned herself as the indispensable information hub, controlling the flow of family news while ensuring that no one else developed direct relationships with Grandma Rose. Every lie had served a dual purpose, creating drama that kept family members distanced from each other while making Diane seem like the stable, reliable constant. The modeling contract was supposed to be my proof, I said, pulling out my phone to show the fake newsletter. But you couldn't resist improving the lie, could you? You turned my fictional, major modeling agency into Versace, then Gucci, then Calvin Klein. You got so excited about having the biggest piece of fake family news that you forgot to keep your story straight. Diane stared at the newsletter on my phone screen, and I saw the exact moment she realized she'd been completely outmaneuvered. How long has Margaret Walsh been waiting for my call about that television interview? I asked. The silence that followed was deafening. Diane's shoulders sagged as the weight of her exposure settled over her like a burial shroud. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the loss of her carefully maintained control over our family's narrative. Margaret Walsh is expecting you to call her back by Monday morning at 9 a.m., she said, her voice barely audible. I told her you were just being modest about your achievements. And when I don't call, I pressed. She'll probably call you directly. Or show up at your work. Diane's hands twisted together in her lap. She's very enthusiastic about local success stories. Grandma Rose leaned forward in her chair, her expression shifting from anger to something that looked almost like pity. Diane, why? Why go to such elaborate lengths to hurt people who love you? The question seemed to break something fundamental in Diane's composure. Her perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the tears that started flowing, or the way her voice cracked when she finally answered. Because nobody ever calls, she whispered. Nobody visits. Nobody asks how I'm doing or includes me in their real lives. The only time anyone pays attention to me is when I have information about someone else. The raw honesty of it was almost more uncomfortable than her lies had been. I found myself looking away, suddenly understanding the desperate loneliness that had driven years of manipulation. So you decided to become indispensable by controlling the information, Grandma Rose said gently. It started small. Just filling in gaps when people didn't share news themselves. Making things sound more positive than they were. Diane wiped her eyes, smearing mascara across her cheek. But then I realized I could make myself important. Make people need me for family updates. Make you look forward to my Sunday calls. And when the lies got too big to maintain, I convinced you that you were forgetting things. That your memory wasn't reliable. Diane's voice dropped to barely a whisper. I made an 84-year-old woman doubt her own mind so I could keep lying to her. The admission hung in the room like a physical presence. Grandma Rose reached over and patted Diane's trembling hand, a gesture of comfort that Diane absolutely didn't deserve but that perfectly captured my grandmother's capacity for grace. Here's what's going to happen, Grandma Rose said with quiet authority. You're going to call Margaret Walsh tomorrow morning and explain that there was a misunderstanding about the modeling contract. You're going to call every family member you contacted about this fake news and set the record straight. Diane nodded miserably. Then you're going to write letters, handwritten letters, to Timothy, Sarah, Marcus, and everyone else you've hurt with your manipulation. You're going to apologize specifically for each lie and explain how you came by the real information you twisted. And after that? Diane asked. After that, we're going to rebuild trust slowly. Starting with truthful Sunday phone calls where you share only verified information or your own actual news. Grandma Rose's voice softened slightly. Because despite everything, you're still family. But the manipulation stops today. I watched Diane gather her manila folders, those weapons of family destruction, and stand on unsteady legs. At the door, she turned back once. I really am sorry, she said. I never meant for it to go this far. After she left, Grandma Rose and I sat in comfortable silence for several minutes. Finally, she looked at me with a mischievous smile. So, she said, are you excited to turn 26 next March? I laughed until my sides ached. Absolutely. 26 sounds perfect.